Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today we'll talk about school funding in Pennsylvania, but first we're joined by Tom Reese, a state capitol reporter with WESA. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
You wrote that Governor Josh Shapiro said he's prepared if President Trump sends National Guard troops to Pennsylvania. Maybe to start off, for those who have not followed this closely, could you explain briefly the background of President Trump sending troops to cities like Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.?
Sure. So the president has said these cities in particular aren't doing enough to combat crime. He says like a federal deployment would sort of take things into his own hands. He's so far targeted these Democratic-controlled cities, and obviously has put some Pennsylvania cities and the governor maybe a little bit more on watch.
Who ultimately has the authority to police municipalities?
So a public interest lawyer I spoke with says that is up to the city itself, maybe in collaboration with the state's own governor. But he said that, federalizing these troops to combat crime domestically goes against this Posse Comitatus Act that would normally just need congressional approval or a strict reading of the Constitution to decide that that's possible. So he called it unconstitutional and illegal.
Is there any reason to believe that President Trump would target a Pennsylvania city such as Philadelphia?
Right now, we don't believe that that is on his short list. People may have heard that Chicago and Baltimore were mentioned. I think even New Orleans was brought up last week. There's some distinctions there, though, with Baltimore and Chicago run by Democratic mayors and Democratic governors. New Orleans in Louisiana, the governor there is Republican and said he welcomes that sort of intervention. So unclear if Philadelphia, I don't think Pittsburgh would be necessarily the first choice. But Philadelphia's mayor did not tell us really anything. She didn't want to comment or speculate just in case that maybe attracted unwanted attention.
Why is Governor Shapiro preparing for the possibility of the president sending troops to Pennsylvania?
I think just given the size of Philadelphia, I think it toggles between the fifth and sixth largest in the country. If the president has shown that he can do it in LA with a larger population, I think the understanding is, if he's deciding to work through a list of the top cities, Philadelphia, of course, would rank up there.
What specific measures has Governor Shapiro taken or discussed in preparation for the potential of troops coming to Pennsylvania?
There have been few specifics besides saying the preparation is there. I'm assuming that sort of means his administration has like a contingency plan. An obvious first step, I imagine, would be a potential lawsuit, that could potentially hold things up. But it's sort of unclear what that preparation might be. Besides, like, it's on our radar. We're gonna do something if that word comes down.
What position have you heard from Stacey Garrity, who is a Republican candidate for governor, challenging Governor Shapiro?
Right. Yeah, we reached out to her campaign. We didn't get a direct response on, would she support collaboration with federal troops, or would she be okay with sending Pennsylvania's own guard to other states? But she basically said she's pro law and order policies that Trump has handed down, and she gave a nod to her campaign's promise, saying like a Republican governor would be the way to go to crack down on crime here in Pennsylvania.
How are Pennsylvania city leaders, in particular Philadelphia Mayor Sherri Parker, responding to the potential of the president sending troops into their cities?
So last week when I reached out to the Parker administration, they did not comment. I know that the Philly District Attorney Larry Krasner, though, has been very vocal. And I think maybe that's unsurprising given he's sort of been challenged a lot by Republicans locally and statewide. Maybe he felt like it's his role as the, one of the top law enforcers in the city to push back there.
Finally, have you heard any response from the Trump administration itself following the governor's comments that he's preparing in the possibility of the president sending troops to Pennsylvania?
I will say I did not hear back from them, but I did read in another reporter's story that they weren't pleased with what Shapiro said, and I get pretty sure it's to mischaracterize what Trump would be doing if he were to send troops here.
Tom Rees, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after this short break. Welcome back. Our guests today are Hannah Barrick, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officials, Sherri Smith, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators, and Aaron Chapin, President of the Pennsylvania State Education Association. Aaron, we'll start with you. The state budget is now over 2 months delayed. What impact is this having on schools?
Well, unfortunately, this is money that's long overdue. We know it's been 2 payments. We had a small payment in July for special education. And now, as we are, getting into Labor Day and out of Labor Day, it's $1.75 billion. But when there's all the other, money that goes to other programs, it's closer to $3 billion that school districts have missed in Pennsylvania. And it is going to have a detrimental effect. Districts are now starting to worry, when is this money going to arrive? They can only last so long. And obviously the situations are different across the state, but they are eagerly awaiting the money that is long overdue, 10 weeks late.
Hannah, your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. School districts pass their budget by June 30th, as they are required to by law, and they started their fiscal year as planned. Unfortunately, they still don't know what revenue they're going to get from the state. They have no idea what the timeline is, and school is open. Kids are back, so they've had to do a lot of things that they didn't plan for. Delay purchases of supplies, technology. Many of them have had to borrow just to ensure that they're keeping the doors open. And as we move forward and this is not resolved, we're going to see more and more school districts in really difficult positions to ensure that they're providing what they can and need to provide for students, again, with no certainty of what they're going to get from the state.
Sherri?
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues. I think the other thing to add to this is, our budgets were due June 30th, and our school districts put their budgets together to be honest with you, without a clear understanding of what the state funding would be for them this year. So they build a budget based on, possibilities and not necessarily having the actual data. And here we are, over 2 months later, and they're still waiting to find out how much funding they will get from the state. So they're stalling on any new programs, student programs, and hiring staff and resources that they need. And we're at a critical place right now where now our superintendents and our business officials are concentrating on, do we have to borrow money to keep our doors open and to continue to educate our students and pay our staff? So it's a critical time, and it's a frustrating time for our schools.
Could one of you address the issue of school reserves and what role they play in helping to fill the gap? And are there limits on what reserves school districts can keep?
Yeah, so school districts have, multiple sort of buckets of dollars that they can sort of maintain. There are limitations on unassigned fund balances, and that really is limited to about 8% for most school districts. The situation across the state is really different, school district to school district. Some school districts are in situations where they have fund balance. They have, planned programs and expenditures sort of over time that they're planning to pull from those dollars. Others are in situations where they don't have the benefit of having any reserves at all or very minimal reserves. And so we're seeing, as we're going through this budget impasse, certainly a lot of difference across the state, across the Commonwealth, sort of inequity across school districts in terms of their ability to respond to the impasses. Some of them, again, if they have some fund balance, they're in a very fortunate situation. If they're able to pull some of that to sort of smooth things over and ensure that the impacts of the impasse aren't being felt on students. But not every school district is in that situation. And so as Sherri mentioned, that's where we're seeing districts, having to borrow funds or having to make decisions where we're not going to hire for this position or engage in a program that they had planned to engage in.
Ultimately, when schools have to borrow to keep their heads afloat, what does that impact the taxpayers down the road then through increased property taxes later?
Certainly. I mean, borrowing dollars borrowing money is not free, right? There are costs associated with that from council fees and bank fees. And, those can range anywhere from $20,000, $100,000 plus. So the impact on that, all of that was not budgeted. And so the impact on taxpayers, the impact on school budgets and what they are spending that wasn't planned and how that impacts the student is certainly the challenge that they're grappling with right now. But students and taxpayers are certainly impacted.
I'd like to hear from all of you what you're hearing in terms of what is holding up, what's delaying the budget impasse regarding the school funding piece.
Well, I mean, from my perspective and from PSEA's perspective, we're hearing that a lot of it has to do with the Senate President Pro Tem Kim Ward saying that she said no budget's going to get passed unless there's vouchers. And we've seen time after time across the country that this kind of idea of funneling millions of dollars to private and religious schools is just a horrible idea. And from what we're hearing, that's the holdup. To use our students as bargaining chips, it's not wise. We need to be investing into our public schools. Lawmakers 2 years ago agreed, they were going to go forth with a 7-year plan to fully fund our school districts, adequately fund them. And they did it. There's like over $500 million extra dollars that were invested last year, and they're supposed to do it again this year. Again, it hasn't happened, with the Senate's budget. So, vouchers seems to be one of the sticking points.
Hannah, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, certainly we have been in a situation over the past couple of years, certainly last year, significant investment in education to ensure that we are dealing with the inadequacy in terms of the funding that we've seen across school districts. And so I think certainly the conversations around ensuring that the investment into education is significant is partially, I am sure, part of the delay that we have seen. Also, we recognize that while the education budget is a huge chunk of the overall general fund expenditure, there are a lot of other areas outside of education that I think are proving to be challenging, certainly as well.
Sherri, what are you hearing?
Yeah, but not much right now, honestly. So, which is very disappointing. I think it's a difficult budget year. There's no doubt about it, right? There's a lot of federal changes that each state has been managing, and then we have a split House to Senate, R versus D, and I know those make the conversations more difficult, but they shouldn't be excuses of why we aren't getting together just by this point in time of the year and getting a budget together. So I think there's, lots of discussions of where the revenues are coming from, what are those revenue sources that they can use for the budgeting. And I just think between all that, there's obviously some huge disagreements or discussions on mass transit in Pennsylvania that's creating some of those delays as well, on top of all the education issues. But the fact of the matter is that this stalling only creates bigger problems for our local taxpayers in our schools, and so it's time, no matter how difficult that conversation is, to get together and put together a budget for this year.
Some of you had referenced the adequacy increased payments that were in last year's budget for education. How can you measure whether the schools that received that funding benefited from those?
Well, I mean, we've seen across the state. We've seen STEM programs that were enacted. We've seen math and literacy coaching that's been able to take place. We've seen K-3 grade levels go down because we are able to add more staff. So these are all positive benefits. And of course, it's not going to change everything in 1 year, but that's what 1 year of investments, how it's paying off. And we're super optimistic that, we continue with this 7-year plan. This is you're going to see just a runaway freight train here, and it's going to have great impacts in Pennsylvania for our students.
Yeah, I will say, districts last year started the planning and the process for how are we going to sort of move our programs, forward, ensure that we're supporting all students and using that state investment most effectively. So they had 1 year to sort of start that process and start that planning. Many of them, again, sort of multi-step process to be able to roll those additional funds into their budgets and support students in the most effective way. So we had 1 year, and again, a lot of uncertainty and question right now about what happens now as we're waiting and the school year has already started.
Some lawmakers had questioned the fairness of the adequacy payment funding formula because not all 500 school districts received it. How do you respond to those concerns?
So I think it's really important to remember as part of the agreement that was made for how do you rectify the Commonwealth Court case for adequacy was that they also stated that you need to put $200 million into the BEF every year. That was a decision made by that I think is really critical to understand. Yeah, those dollars, the adequacy districts certainly need their dollars, right? However, you can't forget that costs are increasing for all districts. So there's 152 districts who receive no adequacy dollars. They've got increases that are coming. And let's also remember, you need to invest additional dollars moving forward if you're eventually going to even all of this out. You can't just backfill and think that with rising costs that you can't put any money for all districts moving forward, or you're going to create a bigger divot in about 5-6 years. So you're going to have districts that weren't adequacy districts now become the districts that need the adequacy dollars, right? So it's a real problem. It has to be an investment for all 500 on top of the adequacy dollars so that we make sure that we don't get into a situation that got us into this Commonwealth Court case.
Should student enrollment play a role in that funding formula as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think student enrollment does play an impact in the funding formula. The state has multiple funding formulas, basic education, special education funding formulas. They look at, the number of students a school district has. And so generally, those sort of dynamic portions of those formulas direct resources to districts or larger portions of resources to districts that have growing enrollment or growing populations of students that might have be living in poverty or might have other educational needs. At the same time, I think it's important to recognize that the overall experience across Pennsylvania with our general demographics so that we're declining in population, particularly for those individuals under the age of 65. So it makes sense that that's a situation in declining enrollment for most of our schools are experiencing. But as we talked before, just because you have declining enrollment or increasing enrollment, doesn't mean that your costs are changing. And so I think some of those challenges, while we do have formulas that sort of direct additional funds to certain districts based on enrollment, it doesn't quite match the growth in costs that either declining enrollment or increasing enrollment school districts are experiencing.
I'm sure. I mean, we are seeing some school districts with declining enrollment, but like we had 200 school districts out of 500 that had increases last year. And so we can't ignore that, but like we also can't ignore the fact that there are some school districts where their enrollment's going down by like in the teens. Like you go to the Northeast School District up by Erie, and it's down by like over a dozen. You go to Lakeland School District in the Lackawanna area, and it's only going down by 15, 16. That's like 1 or 2 per grade level. That doesn't change the fact that you still need to keep the buildings open. You need to heat them. We still need the staff, all the office staff and cafeteria workers and bus drivers. And class sizes really aren't going down drastically. So we need to continue investing. And that's basically what we need to keep doing, maintain the plan that we agreed upon last year, or 2 years really, and continue the second year of this program.
The Erie Times published a survey today from Adopt a Classroom. They found that U.S. teachers on average spend $895 out of pocket on school supplies. Aaron, is that typical or accurate for what you see from your members?
I actually am surprised that it's that low. I know educators and support staff during the summer, they are bulking up on supplies, but all throughout the school year, they're spending their own money on supplies. In many cases, food. Which is only going to grow worse due to some cuts that the federal government has made over the summer. our educators and support staff, are selfless, and they are constantly buying supplies for their students because that's just what teachers and support staff do. We take care of our kids.
The governor's proposal recommends using $1.6 billion of the rainy day fund. Is that a sustainable source to continue to keep funding levels up to where they were last year or to increase them?
I'm not sure. I'd say it's not a permanent source. It's there for when we have emergencies. But I know that lawmakers, they've been mulling over a couple different alternative sources. They're looking at ways to invest. But, we're not talking, staggering amounts of money that need to be invested into education. So, can it be, we dip our toe into it? Absolutely. It's very healthy. But there's other resources to be utilized out there, and I think lawmakers need to come together, have those really hard discussions, and come to an agreement on something.
Beyond funding itself, what other changes, efficiencies would you like to see take place to help better education in Pennsylvania?
I think one of the things that is on the table and has been, gotten a lot of attention and a lot of discussion is the need for cyber charter funding reform. So we talked a little bit about the funding and the expectations of districts sort of for the 25-26 fiscal year. But that is one of the areas where school districts and taxpayers need significant relief. It is a driving mandated cost. It impacts school district budgets year over year over year. And so we're really hopeful that when the state budget is completed, it will include some changes in the charter school or cyber charter school tuition rate that will provide some needed relief for school districts and for taxpayers.
Sherri?
Sure, and can't agree with that more. The overpayment of our cyber charter tuition rates needs to change, and it's a good year to do that, right? In the fact that it could return some dollars back to school districts if we had more reasonable tuition payments for our cyber charter students. Other than that, honestly, a continued conversation, a release of state and federal mandates. We have so many mandates and so many requirements on our school districts that continued conversation with our legislators on how to release and get more flexibility in how that we educate our students across the Commonwealth, I think number one would help us to better meet today's students' needs if we could be more flexible and provide some innovative and creative ways of doing education. But that means releasing some mandates that are on the backs of our districts that are many times cause increased costs for our school districts.
Since Hannah brought up the idea of the whole issue of cyber charter schools, since the COVID pandemic of 5 years ago, have schools increased their cyber offerings within their own school district in addition to these separate cyber charter schools?
Absolutely. I think a lot of school districts realized that they had a great opportunity to keep their students in their district and educate them according to their curriculums and policies. It's really been, very few silver linings came out of COVID. This was one of them, and districts are taking advantage. And I think while reform does need to happen, I think there's a real belief on both sides of the aisle that something needs to be done right now. You had the Auditor General who came out and said that it should be done. The governor also agreed. Again, different parties. But we also really need to make sure that, we're including, we have a lot of cyber, educators that, have a lot of great experience. They should be part of these conversations. And, we represent some of these, it's 1,000, but they want to be part of the discussions. And I think everybody needs to come together and have these talks. And I think some great compromises can be made.
Now, Aaron, a few moments ago earlier in the program, you talked a little bit about how you suspect that vouchers may be part of the reason why there's disagreement and delay on the budget. What role do vouchers have in the education spectrum?
What role do they have or should they have? I mean, I don't think they should have any role here. These are dollars that need to be invested into our public schools. 90% of our kids in Pennsylvania go to a public school. We need to invest like we should be. We've got generations. In some areas of the state, they've been historically, generationally underfunded. And what we need to do, instead of taking vouchers and giving it, which will end up going really to the wealthy anyway, kids who are already going to these schools, we need to invest into public schools. Don't even think about using the vouchers. Again, why use a system that across the nation has come up empty? And We just need to fully invest and uphold the promise to our Pennsylvania public schools.
Hannah, has your organization taken a position on school vouchers?
Yeah, I think that's certainly something that our association opposes, the implementation in school vouchers, really, as Erin's point, really ensuring that we are focusing, public dollars into public schools and making sure that we are providing them with the resources, the dollars that students need. As we started through this process over the past couple of years, and particularly last year with the adequacy investment. So prioritizing that is certainly where our association is.
Sherri, I'll give you an opportunity to speak on vouchers as well.
Yeah, just will add, one of the things as a state we always need to do is look how things have occurred in other states. And when you look at states that have brought in voucher programs, it has gone well. Part of the reasons, or we hear why you want to put vouchers into place, is because you want to help students that, are in poverty or to get into other schools. And when you look at other states, 80% of the funding goes to school students that are already in private schools. So it hasn't increased that. One of the things that I always say is, look, we haven't funded our public schools appropriately yet. Why would we be looking at other projects and other things until we get the funding for our public schools in place? So we need to focus on funding our public schools this year. That's where we need to put the focus. And as Erin indicated, that's 90% of our students. So let's look at taking care of them in the public school system that we have here in the Commonwealth.
Another area of the budget impasse that had been a sticking point that's really been in the news, particularly this last week or so, has been funding for transportation. There have been some holdups and cuts with mass transit agencies. How has that in fact impacted people's ability to get their children to school?
I think, looking across the state, certainly for those in this area, there's been a lot of news over the past couple of weeks about driver shortages and school transportation challenges. In some school districts, they are using public transportation. That is an integral part of their transportation program. So certainly in those schools, the challenges surrounding SEPTA have been impacting their ability to start the school year off on the right foot. I think even apart from that, right, pupil transportation funding is a component of the budget that is delayed right now. And we are seeing certainly the impact of driver shortages all across the Commonwealth, really impacting the start of school. So it's challenging. And, with all of the uncertainty, I think, that is coming with no state budget and no clear picture of what revenue they're going to receive from the state, I think it's made it even more difficult for some school districts to be able to respond to some of those challenges, work with their contractors, increase bus driver pay. So it is all sort of a connected mess. Certainly, again, not everybody's impacted by the SEPTA challenges, but I think most school districts are impacted by transportation challenges just as the school year is getting underway.
As we're talking about the ongoing impasse, we're roughly about 10 weeks into it right now. Do you think the fact that state workers are still being paid kind of delays the impetus, perhaps, to get a budget done by June 30th?
I think the situation is a little different now, since the money does go out to certain groups of employees. It makes it challenging that there's nothing forcing a great urgency to get the budget done. So it does make it a little more challenging, I think, as we go through September. And we have superintendents and school boards, principals, teachers, and just community members starting to feel the pinch. I think that's what, and they're going to start reaching out to legislators. I think that's what's going to really start to get the ball moving. But we don't want it to go much longer, because we really are going to start to see detrimental effects in school districts.
We're going to continue our discussion in just a moment, but first let's give our guests a break while we look at what PCN is covering this week. We have a statewide judicial election coming up in November. You can see the state Supreme Court candidates for retention on a program hosted by Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts tonight at 5 o'clock. The state budget impasse in Harrisburg has consequences for public transportation, especially in Pennsylvania's big cities. On tomorrow's Capitol Preview, we'll have the chairs of the House Transportation Committee, Ed Nielsen for the majority and Carrie Benninghoff for the minority. That's tomorrow morning live at 9 a.m. On the issues this week, the state lawmaker wants to eliminate the property tax and replace it with a system that she says is more equitable. Senator Dawn Keefer explains her proposal Wednesday at 7 p.m. The state budget impasse has an impact on funding for Pennsylvania's libraries. Christy Bucher from the Pennsylvania Library Association tells us what's at stake on Wednesday at 7:30. On Journalists Roundtable this week, we'll have Jillian McGoldrick from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Kate Wangpu from Spotlight PA, and Jackson White from WITF. They'll have the latest news for you Thursday at 7 p.m. Thursday marks the anniversary of the crash of Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. It was one of 4 aircrafts hijacked by terrorists on September 11th, 2001. You can see the ceremony in Shanksville Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free online. Check out our streaming service, PCNSelect.com. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now let's return to our discussion about school funding in Pennsylvania, looking at some of Governor Shapiro's budget proposals. He proposes $111 million toward providing mental health resources and school safety initiatives. Is that adequate?
It's a step. It certainly is. Like Governor Shapiro, and of course, the Senate and House and past budgets, they've made a commitment. And Governor Shapiro has been a champion of school safety, school mental health. Obviously, the horrible tragedy that took place in Minnesota a couple of weeks ago is just it puts a spotlight on what we need to do to ensure that our students never have to worry about that in Pennsylvania. And he continues to invest, which we applaud him for doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Has the need for mental health resources grown since the pandemic?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is a tremendous change in the needs of our students post the pandemic and school. So, mental health concerns have certainly increased. And with mental health concerns grows increasing safety concerns in our schools as well. So providing those resources, putting preventive measures into our schools to try to, provide an environment and a culture where all of our students feel safe in school has certainly we are really focused on that these days. And then when a student exhibits a need for mental health services, school districts have stepped up. But with that, I will also indicate that it's really important to remember that our public schools are a lot to our students and a lot for our communities anymore. They provide a lot of services. So certainly they need to be part of the solution for mental health services for our students, but we also need the support of our community resources, county resources, and such to be able to provide that full continuum of services for our students and their families. So it's important, and we're very thankful for those continued dollars for safety and mental health grants, and they absolutely need to continue for our schools to be able to meet the needs of all of our students.
The governor's calling for an increase of $40 million for special education funding. That is below the rate of inflation. What do school districts do to meet their needs beyond that?
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the sort of really huge areas in terms of growth and cost. School districts are spending more than $6 billion annually to ensure that they are providing special education services for students. But they're receiving about $1 billion, just over $1 billion from the state. So there's a huge delta there that school districts are covering through property tax increases. They're covering through sort of shifting dollars around and ensuring that they're prioritizing and have resources to cover those special education costs, perhaps at the detriment of implementing a different program or hiring additional staff. And so $40 million is a really, really tiny amount in comparison to the extent of the growth in that area. And I think that's something that all 500 school districts are experiencing. That's something I think when we hope that the budget is finally passed, that will be a number in terms of the increase there that is significantly more than $40 million proposed.
Aaron, how are schools doing with hiring and retaining teachers?
Well, obviously, there's been, we've struggled to keep, educators in our pipeline. We saw a drastic drop, over a decade. There was like a 67% decrease in first-time certificates being issued. But PSCA and our partner groups, I think we've worked really well with legislators as well as with the governor to really try and fix this problem. There's a student teacher stipend that was in last year's budget, which was a huge success. About 2,100 or so college students received a stipend during their student teaching experience because obviously that is their full-time job. And it was met with huge accolades. And this year, while they haven't been able to go and verify this yet because of the budget crisis, there's 3,500 college students that have applied for this stipend again this year. Governor Shapiro proposed, I think, $40 million this year, so that was a $10 million increase. Huge success. But we also have apprenticeship programs that are being enacted for that our support staff can be trained and learn and be certified then as a teacher. And there's about $8 million that's in this year's budget for that as well. And these have been huge successes in getting young people and getting people already in our classroom, in our school buildings, to be educators. And so we're working at it. It's a long-term fix. Nothing's going to happen overnight, but we are working with different groups and to make this a reality.
What else can be done to grow the teacher workforce?
Well, I think we need to start younger, though. At PSCA, we've worked, in helping to fund Educators Rising. And so last year, we had several hundred students that were in a program across the Commonwealth where they were learning how to be educators. They were shadowing and learning the ins and outs. And it was met with huge success. I met with a number of these students last spring when they came together for their conference in Pennsylvania. And they're thrilled to be experiencing what it's like to be a teacher, to be in the greatest profession there is. And we've got to start young. Again, this is a long-term solution, and I think we're really on the right track right now.
Are there active efforts to diversify the teacher workforce?
Oh, absolutely. I think we've gone at PSCA. We've gone around to different school districts that have been traditionally underfunded and trying to give them these resources to start these kind of programs. And I think that it's going to be successful as well as the student teacher stipend, which will keep educators, our college students in college where they may not be able to due to financial circumstances. These are efforts that are really going to be paying off.
What about substitute teachers? In the past, we've heard reports that there's been a shortage of substitute teachers as well. What can be done to attract more people to assist in that lane?
Well, you got to pay substitutes more money, just like our support staff. Paying our bus drivers, our office staff, our cafeteria workers more money. It's just not enough, and they can go off to a Walmart or a Sheetz or a Wawa and make a lot more money, have a lot less stress in their lives. We need to pay more money. Substitutes, they're a huge part of the educational process, and we need to pay them like they deserve. And so many districts, look, there are some districts that are starting to pay more. You start more than $100 a day, but that's not enough. We need to pay them what they deserve.
I'd like to shift our focus briefly and talk about the federal funding piece of this. In October, Pennsylvania will receive $230 million in previously frozen education funding as a result of an agreement with the federal government in 24 states. What programs will benefit from this funding?
I see the information or the dollars that were frozen were portions of Title I, which is Title II, Title III, and Title IV. So this was providing resources to schools for professional development for teachers and teacher training. This was providing supports for English learners across schools. So a whole host of programs that were already sort of approved in terms of the appropriation just held by the administration in D.C. While they were doing some review and analysis. Really positive that those funds were able to move through. The unfortunate part of all of that is, unfortunately, the federal funds are held up in our state budget impasse. And so while they may have flowed to Pennsylvania, they're not flowing to schools yet. And so that just exacerbates the financial challenges school districts are facing as a result of the state budget impasse right now.
Sherri, do you want to speak to that as well?
So certainly we're happy that the freeze was dropped and that our schools will eventually, when we have a state budget, get those dollars. But moving forward, we also know that as part of the Big Beautiful Bill, that there's going to be some dollars, the same title programs that Hannah just spoke of. We'll see reduction of dollars for that for the following school year. So, this is a 1 year, we'll get those dollars. And those are part of the concerns too. As professional development for all of our educators and teachers is critically important as we're putting programs into place for our students across the Commonwealth. So even though we have the money coming this year, it is a reduction in funding that all of our schools will have to think about in the 26-27 budget.
Earlier in the year, the Trump administration discussed their desire to dismantle the Department of Education from the federal level. What impact would that have on Pennsylvania?
Well, the state's going to have to make a lot more decisions, right? So do we have the manpower and the ability to manage all of the decisions that were happening at the federal level? Again, I always try to look at the positive part of things. So, maybe there's some positive aspects of that can come to Pennsylvania and our schools by having more state oversight and less federal oversight of those things. But again, there needs to be clarity on what those changes are. And an ability for us to get together and plan effectively so that any changes that happen at the federal level with USDOE having less oversight can be something that we're ready for in our schools and prepared for.
Hannah, you talked about Title I funding a moment ago. Title I provides supplemental funding for school districts that have a lower income area. If the Department of Education were to be further dismantled, what would happen with the poor students that are affected by this?
Yeah, I think lots of questions, right, about what would happen to those funds if those funds would be sort of go to the state and the state would determine how those funds would be distributed, or if large swaths of those funds would just go away, not come to Pennsylvania. I think the schools across the state, everyone is receiving Title I dollars, but the schools that receive the largest percentage of those are also the schools who are in the greatest need for the adequacy funds, the schools in the greatest need for special education funds and basic education funds. And so the impact on again, all 500 school districts, but particularly those that have the greatest need for resources to be able to support their students would be significant. We would just be taking a gigantic step backwards with all of the sort of state investment that we have been trying to prioritize over the past couple of years. So that's something I think we're all really focused on, concerned about as we look ahead to the 26-27 state budget, how that will interact with whatever the federal government, whatever direction they decide to go with their fiscal year 26 budget when that's completed. So kind of hard to look ahead, 26-27, when we're still sort of in this space waiting for 25-26 to be resolved. But we certainly see that as a major challenge on the horizon.
Yeah, I think, for this plan of this, how this dismantling the Department of Education, there was no plan. Unfortunately, it was, we're going to do this, and we didn't look at how it could be implemented, the effects that it's going to have on states. And as much as we appreciate all the work that the Department of Ed in Pennsylvania does, it's just they don't have the capacity right now to take the responsibilities that are coming their way. But it's also important to keep in mind that a lot of these, there's a lot of implications from that bill that you referenced earlier that, we've got cuts coming, not right this school year, but next school year. People are going to be forgetting, but there's SNAP benefits that are going to affect thousands and thousands of kids in our public schools. They depend upon SNAP to get that food that they're not getting at home so that they can have a successful day at school. And then there's the Medicaid cuts as well. And these are all things that many people are going to forget about. But when 2027 rolls around, they're going to be in effect. And so it's our kids. It's the people in Pennsylvania that desperately need these resources the most that are really going to hurt. And we've got to really analyze, what we're going to do to help put these supports into place. Because our kids, we shouldn't be doing this to them.
The Senate returns to session today. How hopeful are you, or what is the likelihood that you see for some sort of budget agreement to start to come together?
Wow. That's a question for the Senate, I believe. Look, they could come in today and they can get this thing done. There's no doubt in my mind that it can be taken care of. And I'm still optimistic. I have a sliver of optimism. Maybe not as much as you've got optimism, but I just don't have. I'm hoping that they come in, they realize that this needs to get taken care of, that our kids need to be a priority, that the citizens of Pennsylvania just need a budget so that we can move forward. Why have this black cloud hanging over all of us right now? It's the start of a school year. It's exciting. And yet, who knows where the money's coming from? But it could get done today. It could get done this week. There's nothing stopping them from doing it.
Yeah. With the legislature returning to session and coming back to Harrisburg, what will your organizations do to share your perspective with the lawmakers that are involved in these budget negotiations and to express your concerns for the long-term impact as this budget is longer delayed?
Yeah, I mean, we will continue to work with our members and make sure that we're sharing the impact with them, make sure they're talking to their legislators so that they understand what this means for students, what this means for additional costs, what this means for the positions they can't hire now, what this means for the programs that they're not implementing. And again, September 25th is the date of the next state payment that is due to schools. It would be great if on September 25th, they received what they should get in September, as well as July and August. So there's a window of opportunity to sort of sort all of these things through. But I think making sure that school districts are talking to their legislators and are understanding, so that they are understanding that the real world implications, the impact on kids, the impact on taxpayers, that will only get worse if we miss that September payment.
Yeah, I think we have to obviously share the impacts of their indecisiveness on our schools and our students. And to be honest with you, I can't imagine that they want that for our children either. So yeah, Aaron, I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to be optimistic that they're going to get a budget this week, because they have to realize, and I think they do realize this, is that they're hurting their kids, they're hurting their communities and our local taxpayers. And I don't think they want to do that. So I'm going to remain optimistic that they'll do the right thing this week and get it done. And they all know that we are here to help them. We're a phone call away anytime they have a question or a decision. We have daily contacts with our school districts and with our superintendents and business officials and teachers every week. And we carry their stories, and we're here to help our legislators with getting past this impasse.
Aaron, I'll give you the final word.
I just please get this budget passed. Let's take care of our kids. Let's take care of the teachers and support staff and the administrators that are doing everything to make this Commonwealth the best state in the nation. And I think, we've got a really good chance.
Our guests have been Aaron Chapin, President of the Pennsylvania State Education Association, Sherri Smith, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators, and Hannah Barrick, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officials. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
PCN recently spoke with Emily Neff, Director of Public Policy at Trying Together, on how the budget impasse is affecting child care and pre-K centers in Pennsylvania.
Welcome to our program. Can you tell us a bit about your organization, Trying Together?
Trying Together is an early childhood nonprofit based in Southwest PA. We really are about supporting the adult caregivers in young children's lives in making sure that they have the resources they need. And so that includes early childhood educators, that includes families, that includes other caregivers. And we are part of the Start Strong PA campaign, which is really focused on supporting healthy child development in working families and making sure that there's an increased access and affordability of high quality childcare so families can get to work.
How would you describe the state of childcare and pre-K in Pennsylvania currently?
Unfortunately, like most of the country, we are in a crisis. And so it's really what is a system that's not working for everyone using it. So early childhood educators are woefully underpaid for the amazing work they do with our youngest children. Families are paying as much as their rent or mortgage to have childcare. And that's if they can find it. Oftentimes they're on long waiting lists. I myself am an expecting parent. I'm on a waiting list. I got on one before I even told my mom, because that's the state we're in right now. And oftentimes programs have classrooms that are closed and they could serve more children, but they can't because of the staffing crisis that we're facing.
Now, the state budget has been at an impasse for 2 months now. How does that impact childcare and pre-K in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so right now, during a state budget impasse, the child care work subsidy is on a list of must pay. So any program who has children who utilize the subsidy, child care works. There's what's qualifying, a certain income threshold at 200% or below, and that you're working or in education or training. Those payments are still being made, and so that's a good thing. However, that's just one part of the system, and that doesn't really always cover the cost of care. So there's still some issues. I think really importantly, we have this amazing opportunity in Pennsylvania this year. The governor proposed a $55 million child care teacher recruitment and retention act that obviously is a new line item. It's a great opportunity for Pennsylvania to put themselves on the map. It would be $1,000 payments to teachers. And we don't know what's going to happen with that right now. And it could be something that, I just heard of a program in our region who closed a toddler classroom. I have another program who I spoke with who said, if I lose one more teacher, I'm going to have to close this classroom. So imagine if we had those $1,000 payments to keep people, to show how valued they are. I think another piece with the budget impasse is our pre-K counts program. So our public funded pre-K program, it's free for 3 and 4-year-olds. High quality, and many programs, because of the budget impasse, aren't getting those payments. Some programs have had to lay off teachers for now, have that classroom closed. Those families have to find care elsewhere. Some are doing their best in opening programs, but they've taken out a line of credit, and the interest on that line of credit is enormous. And when the grant does come through, they're going to have to be putting money back towards that, rather than it going to the children. So I think those are some of the biggest issues around that. It's really that workforce piece, making sure there's teachers, and that impacts families to have access. They have to now go find care elsewhere.
How much do pre-K and childcare centers usually get in the state budget every year?
So we've had a lot of success over the years around, seeing increases in pre-K counts so that we can serve more children and be able to, serve more children, pay professionals a little bit more if there's a rate increase. Unfortunately, I think last year pre-K was level funded, and childcare over the years, while we have had, increases to the subsidy program, this is the first year where we really have had the opportunity to invest in the workforce and create a new program that would really solve a lot of our problems. And so that's what we're hoping for this year. And then we can hopefully build on that year after year and get more in the system, because it often is overlooked. We're not part of the K-12 funding package. We're separate, right? So we need more investments to really make sure that programs have what they need, teachers are being paid better, and families have access, and it's not costing families even more than they're already paying.
We've been speaking with Emily Neff, Director of Public Policy at Trying Together. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
That concludes today's show. The PCN Capitol Preview returns tomorrow to discuss transportation funding with House Transportation Committee Chairs, Representatives Ed Nielsen and Carrie Benninghoff. That's tomorrow morning, live at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thanks for watching.